Good afternoon and welcome to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM. Each week, I invite an expert from the world of business to share their knowledge, insights, and tips to help you with your particular challenges. If there's a topic you would like covered, or if you feel you can make a contribution, please email me at yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie, and perhaps we'll be having a chat here one day soon. My guest today is the CEO of the National Council of the Blind of Ireland. He has spent all of his career in non-for-profit, and on top of that, he's a big rugby fan. Ireland, London Irish, and Baronhall. I'm delighted to welcome Chris White to the You and Your Business studio. Hiya, Chris.
Hi, Alec. How are you?
Good. Talking about rugby, we won't talk about rugby. We'll just keep going on. I think. Leave it alone.
Exactly.
Listen,
Still
you
in
know I'm
mourning.
going to take you back to your last year in school, and I was just sort of wondering: were you one of the people who wanted to travel the world? Were you academic? What was going through your mind? Had you a plan?
I was reasonably academic, quite bookish, quite sporty as well. I had no great master plan, but I did have an overriding ambition to do something that was purposeful and that was something that was gave back to other people. I flirted with the priesthood very briefly.
Right.
I was always looking at, having grown up in a council house on the outskirts of London with Irish parents, always looking at how we could actually make a difference and contribute to society rather than just perhaps selling something or just doing something for the sake of it. I always needed something that was going to be personally fulfilling and delivering some value to society.
What do you think inspired that sort of feeling and thought within you?
Oh, definitely my parents. My parents are from Dublin. My mum is from Moore Street and my dad is from Church Street.
All
And
right.
then I grew up with a very strong sense of public service and very much a view that we're all part of society and the social contract is an important thing. Education is key to that. And to ensure that we do make a contribution, that we care about our fellow citizens, that we care about what we do and how we do it, that we care about people in the streets, and we care about what we do and how we portray ourselves. So, yeah, very much from the home.
It's funny, just as an aside, I remember going to school in the day, and I'll show my age here, that civics was one of the topics on the curriculum. Unfortunately, I don't think we see it these days, or else maybe it's presenting in a different format.
Yeah, we did. I mean, in England, you don't do civics at all. There's nothing like that. I think CSP is done now in Irish schools,
Hmm.
and my son and daughter definitely do that. But yeah, I think understanding how we've ended up where we are, how our society is built, our responsibilities to the society that we live in, is really important. And I would be a huge advocate of Kennedy in this, which is, ask not what your
Yes.
country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Yeah.
Not in a nationalistic,
No.
protective sort of way, but as a sort of nation building, society building approach.
Yeah, and in your community and things like that, little things go a long way.
Yeah.
All right, you're going to take that sort of pathway to serving the community. So, and you're going to sort of get involved in academia as well. Where was the starting point for all of that?
So I was going to be a teacher. So I went to St Mary's College, Strawberry Hill, just outside London in Twickenham. Did first year teacher training. Very much it's a Vincentian college,
Sure.
very much like St Pat's in Drumcondra. Uh, Loved the university, loved the college, fantastic friends. Still very fondly recall it now. Teaching though wasn't for me.
Right.
I found the subject great and loved teaching it. Classroom management, not so much. So
Right.
decided to switch, drop out of education, and do my degree in history and classics, not history and education.
All right. Okay. Is this a sort of standing still type degree as you kind of make up your mind what you really want to do?
Yeah, well, history was I thought about being a proper academic. I went on to do a master's in Queen's University in Irish politics,
Hmm.
with a thought that maybe I'll be an academic and publish and do all that sort of stuff. But
Sure.
again, the more I got involved in academia, the more I actually felt that I'd actually like to be a bit more involved. give a bit more back, be less reflective and more active in doing things rather than reflecting on what other people might be doing.
All right. That's fairly insightful at a young age. All right, then. So we've gone through our 3 years in college. You're going to actually have to do something and earn a living out of that. So where were you heading off to, and how are you going to sort of marry the two things in terms of sort of giving back and earning a living as well?
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting dynamics, Alec, is being the first person through third level in your family.
All right.
You are that trailblazer. You don't really understand how it all hangs together. What is the expectation? The milk rounds for graduate internships, and you don't really get that unless somebody's guiding you through it. So I came out of university having not done any of that
Right.
because no one had said you should do it, and the career guidance wasn't that strong in the university because everyone went to be a teacher, so that was easy. So I came out going, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And an opportunity arose to work for the London Borough of Ealing, good West London, very strong Irish community. And I worked in the housing department, social housing department, managing a patch in Acton on the Acton estate, Acton Town estate, just by the tube station. And my eyes were opened as to the challenges of social housing, living in high-rise accommodation, what real dense housing really meant, the loneliness of it, the isolation of it, being surrounded by people but being on your own. It was as a young man, 22, 23, it was a real eye-opening experience.
Yeah, I'd say it was. And I mean, there's so many parallels. We're going back, a couple of decades here, and there's so many parallels today still there. The same challenges seem to be there to be met. If you were to pick sort of the biggest challenges at that time, what do you think they were? And had you any sort of strategy to overcome any of them?
I think you're at sort of micro level, but I mean, I think what I found continually was the sadness associated with the lack of community. And I think London's a very big place, and you have to work hard to be in it. You have to work hard to be in the community, whereas so many people are just left aside from it. The number of people, so I was doing terrible jobs of I dealt with a whole range of people who had committed suicide,
Yes.
had been left in their apartments or their houses for long periods because they didn't know anybody and they weren't connected. So what really came through was the need to remain connected to
Right.
society, not to just drop off. And that is not society continually reaching out to you, but that active reach out that you have to engage yourself with the
Yeah.
society that's around you. There's no expectation that society will reach out to you and get you involved.
I mean, in Dublin, we don't tend to have a lot of high rise, although they're more prevalent recently. Was that one of the main challenges, the high rise developments?
No, I think it's more the underlying issue of lack of this sort of somewhat libertarian approach to social housing, which has led to an underinvestment in social housing in Ireland, Britain, which is creating the sort of current crises that we have today, which is lack of supply, too few people providing, lack of regulation, lack of private housing impacting, lack of social housing impacting, all of which is driving up prices and driving lack of availability, and then really taking out a lot of the pillars of social housing and driving them into private housing. So you're taking out the people who would have been the pillars of the community and forcing them into private housing, either through tenant purchase schemes or right to buy schemes in the UK, or making social housing some sort of a dirty word, which it wasn't in the 50s, it wasn't in the 60s, it wasn't in the 70s, but
Mm.
became so in the 80s and following years.
And if you're just joining us now, you're listening to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my guest today is Chris White. And that's fascinating about your observations around that. In terms of working for sort of that borough in London, you were there for about 20 years, if I'm not mistaken.
So I was in London, local boroughs. I worked for London Borough of Ealing. I worked also for London Borough of Richmond in West London, and I worked for a couple of housing associations in the UK, and finished my time up in the UK with the Guinness Trust, which is a sister trust to the Ivy Trust, which
All
is
right.
based here in Dublin. Both set up at the same time, providing social housing. The Ivy Trust in England now has, I think, about 50,000 houses. Sorry, the Guinness Trust in England has about 50,000 houses, or maybe even more. The Ivy Trust here has about 2,000, I think.
That's fascinating. Can we just explore this for a minute? Because that there seemed to be a sort of society created for large companies, and Guinness would have been a prime example, whereby they put the infrastructure in around their employees. Because businesses today are challenged with retaining people. And yet Guinness seemed to have been miles ahead of this and many other sort of entrepreneurial families of the past. Have you any sort of observations on that?
It was actually, I think we're going to go back to that, Alec. I think what you found was at the end, it's called the sort of the philanthropic age. At the end of the Victorian era, you had huge amounts of very, very wealthy individuals. Taxation was very low. People acquired a huge amount of wealth. The Guinness family wasn't alone. You had things like in England, you had the Sutton Trust with the Sutton family. You had the Peabody Trust. All of these Victorian foundations that really looked at identifying as housing as one of the key points, and looked to develop good quality, better housing, good sanitation, communal facilities, education being linked to that, springing up. But bear in mind, you also had things like nurses accommodation.
Yes.
Victorians were very good at building nursing homes, not for older people, for actually to be able to house nurses and medical people so they could live cheap by jail to the hospital, so they're not commuting an hour and a half in from where they can afford to live. Housing, I think, was on the cusp of good thinking back in the sort of turn of the last century. Whereas I think as the century wore on, certainly the last 20 years of it, I think we lost connection with that. And I think the Brits lost connection with it. And I think Ireland followed suit, somewhat not as much, but I think there's a sort of economic doctrine around it as opposed to actually social good.
And I suppose if you look at this, again, everything you talked about being correct, of course, but it was also wrapped with community in terms of sports facilities, swimming pools, clubs, and people where people were brought together. So that sense of community and belonging was an integral part of the offering of these large companies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's going to happen now is we're seeing it time and time again, is you're seeing that move back to that. You see Google buying Barrow Street
Yeah.
in the Docklands for accommodation for their staff. You see Intel looking to buy accommodation in and around West Dublin for their staff. You get large corporations who have these huge surpluses realizing actually they need to do more than give out a few grants to local charities to ensure that their staff are attracted to them. They have the right missions and values, but they also have the ability to actually provide accommodation.
Yes, and people are always talking about now. My goodness, it's very hard to retain people, but I'm not sure that the entrepreneur and those who have the ability to make a more valuable contribution fully understand what their responsibilities are.
I completely agree, actually, and I think it's interesting that the HC and Irish hospitals are looking to acquire more accommodation for their nurses. And if you look at it, even take a step back, the guards in local communities used to have accommodation. There
Yeah,
used to be accommodation linked to the fire brigade. There used to be accommodation around that key worker posts that actually accommodation came with them. You still see that with postmasters. So there's a lack, we've lost that connectivity between really important roles that help keep essential, what we would now call essential workers, that
yes.
keep the whole, the wheels on the wagon. And we've pushed further and further away because we've got obsessed with property values and land values. And we've lost the sight, well, it's only worth something if somebody's prepared to buy it. And if they're priced out of the market, then it's not worth anything.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, a lot of the rural towns have had the heart ripped out with sort of Garda stations removed, post offices removed, and all of those places that people congregated weekly and had a purpose for being there and serving the community.
Absolutely. And you see that. I'm not an advocate of drink driving, but that whole the community that was around the rural pubs,
Sure.
And because people have fled the high street. If you're looking at somewhere like, say, Roscommon,
Yes.
Roscommon, somewhere like Roscommon Town, where people have got in their cars and bought and built bungalows further and further away from the town centre, then they're more and more isolated when they can't drive back in and have a pint and stay connected to the community. If we developed our towns a bit more cleverly and living above the shop and ensuring that people can stay in good accommodation but not a drive away, then you don't have this ripping out of the heart of the rural towns of Ireland.
All right, let's move on with you. So you've spent that time there. What was next on your sort of agenda and where you were going to move to?
So I'd always, obviously, parents being from Dublin, we'd been spent every summer as children growing up in Dublin, lots of cousins, good connectivity into the family. Always saw ourselves as Irish living in London. So to come back and live and work in Dublin was always an ambition. An opportunity arose to come back. I started working briefly in Tala for an organization called Get Tala Working, looking at social enterprise and getting local companies going, but then moved very quickly back into Merrion Square, where I was the head of development for the Irish Council for Social Housing, supporting housing associations developing all around the country. So I've been down almost all the Boreans. I've been on all the islands of Ireland, from Inishturk round to Clare, up to Rathlin. So really great 7 years of traveling around the country and enjoying meeting communities who were galvanized to do something important for their own local community.
Right. And if you're just joining us now, you're listening to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my guest today is Chris White, CEO of the National Council of the Blind of Ireland. And we were just talking about you coming back to Ireland or working in sort of social housing and meeting, getting an opportunity to get around to a lot of places that you never even knew existed.
Absolutely.
And the strangest of names, I've come across them through another piece of work I was doing. Yeah, you're there, but you're going to move on again. There's something else for you.
Yeah, so then I moved on to be chief exec of my first chief exec role as the chief exec of the Sue Ryder Foundation based in Laois. So
Right.
with providing accommodation for the elderly of Ireland.
Yes.
So accommodation in Portlaoise, in Carlow Town, in Dorky, in Holy Cross, in Tipperary, and in Ballyroan in Laois as well. So a spread of accommodation, helped grow that, built new schemes in Carlow Town and in Nina in County Tipperary, North Tip, and had a great time there. Really learned what was going on. We had a chain of 30 charity shops as well, very strong in the Midlands and the southeast of the country.
All right, and of course that it helps you get your finger on the pulse of what's going on, and interesting to deal challenges that are still here today and probably will be with us for many decades yet to come. All right, so you've now involved yourself there, but you're again going to move on, and you're picked out for something else.
Yeah, so I then took up a role as chief exec of a brilliant little organization called Board Match, BOARD, and their role was to find experts like yourself, Alec, who could volunteer to be on the boards of the 10,000 or so charities in Ireland. So every charity in Ireland is run by a voluntary board. No one gets paid. But finding people with the right skill set and right interests and availability to serve on those boards, which charities wouldn't exist without them,
Yes.
has always been a challenge. So I was the chief executive of Board Match for 4 years. And again, we grew that organization. We recruited more directors than ever before, encouraged more people to join boards, and really was on the cusp of that. It was quite a difficult time for charities. They're going through quite a few
Yes.
crises and scandals. And we were very much part of that, educating people around the importance of good governance, why it's important to refresh the board. You don't want the same people sitting on your board for 25 years. Fresh challenge. So it's great. It was really good. Built a great little team there, had a great board, some wonderful people who helped on that journey. People like Phil Smith, who's a a solicitor in Arthur Cox, and Ava Gurn now is the chief exec of that, doing a fantastic job. And Board Match is going from strength to strength. It's a great organization.
And a very important organization, because there's been many challenges, as you said, leaving just aside the scandals, that the lack of knowledge of what is expected of board members and the whole area of corporate responsibility. And those rules and regulations have tightened up so significantly, it must be difficult to recruit people to fill those roles.
The ironic thing, Alex, is it's harder to find charities willing to use an unknown network as such,
Yes.
rather than leveraging off body boards, a friend of a friend of a friend.
Yeah.
There tend to be more people willing to serve than there are spaces on boards to fill.
All right.
So we are blessed in Ireland to have so many people who feel that they can volunteer and give time and work with charities. And sometimes it's just the charities having the confidence to embrace that and find the right people who are the right fit for them.
And is it and you would have thought it was quite the opposite the case, in terms of that people would have been scared off getting involved in any of this. So it would have been the opposite to what you're sort of articulating here.
It is counterintuitive, because the received message from the sector, the charity sector, is, oh, we can't find anybody to serve on our board. And yet there's loads of people who would be happy if they were asked, and often they're flattered to be engaged and approached. That's why Board Match is such a brilliant broker of enabling people to express an interest and find a match. It's corporate governance, internet dating.
A nice way of putting it. But yeah, very, very valuable. Let's move on, I suppose, in the last sort of 5 or 6 minutes I've got left here. Yeah, obviously then you are going to move on to your present role. Let's talk about what attracted you to that. Let's maybe talk about some of the challenges that are around it, and some of the initiatives that you're involved in.
Well, NCBI has been one of the staple charities in Ireland. 93 years old, co-founded originally by Helen Keller on her trip from Boston. So huge heritage, one of the oldest non-religious charities in the country. Big footprint, making a huge impact. I was privileged to be only the third chief exec of the organization, and I am only the third chief exec in its 93-year history. So I'm obviously looking older than I am. But the opportunity of working with an organization and bringing a level of leadership to the organization, and actually driving it forward and making it ready for the next 90, 100 years, was the real thing that attracted me. Bringing a sense of drive to build on, literally standing on the shoulders of giants who had got it to where it was, but seeing the opportunity to drive it even further and deliver even greater level of services and opportunities to what was 55,000 people in Ireland with sight loss, but the recent CSO figures have identified 296,000.
Wow. And it's one of those areas, if you talk to anybody, is there any affliction that it would be your worst? It would be sight loss.
You're right, Alex. So there's quite a lot of research on this, but people would rather lose an arm than their sight. They'd rather lose a limb than lose their eyesight. And, I can understand that. But the bravest thing anyone will ever do is walk out their front door with a cane when they can't see. It takes huge courage. And I'm always in awe of our service users who, despite, limited vision, will still engage and work with the world, despite all the challenges that the world presents to them.
And there's new challenges with these powered scooters and people on footpaths and all sorts of things that you can't even hear these days.
All these micro-mobility scooters and electric cars that have no sound, they're all challenges. On the flip side, technology is a great enabler.
Sure.
So people with sight loss can do any job at a computer. They can be an accountant, they can be a PR person, they can do any HR. There's no job that can't be done if it's reliant on a laptop or a computer. and we are continually training people to be fully engaged in the workforce. And I think the big problem, Alec, for us at the moment in Ireland is at a time we have 3.8, 3.9% unemployment, which is effective full employment.
Yes.
Been named by the European Disability Forum as being one of the worst places to try and get a job in Europe if you are disabled.
Right. All right.
So we have this huge pool of talent in Ireland that is continually overlooked by the employers of Ireland, who don't think that people with disabilities can do just as good a job. We've got people who are hugely skilled, crying out for work, can't get work because of discrimination against their disability.
Wow, that's an interesting statistic. I'd love to have time to explore that more, but I don't. I'm aware of some initiatives. We have about a minute and a half left. That's how quickly these interviews
It's
go.
flown by, yeah.
um, you've initiatives out there. Raising funds, of course, is always going to be a massive challenge. How can people help you there?
Well, I think two things. You can save the planet and help fund NCBI by shopping in our charity shops. We have 131 around the country. Pre-loved, secondhand is what now known as pre-loved.
Pre-loved, I love
Um,
that.
is way that we can, my shirt, your shirt, Alec, has cost about 17,000 liters of water to make.
Right.
The more we use them, the more we stay with them, the better. So shopping with us, you can donate online. We've just had a fantastic guy, Peter Ryan, run from Malin to Mizenhead in 5 days. Last week was World Sight Day on Thursday the 12th, and in 5 days he ran 585 kilometers.
Wow.
The guy's an absolute hero. He's vision impaired, and if anybody, Peter Ryan's run, people can support that if they find his donate page.
Great. And it's ncbi.ie, would I be correct?
That's correct. All day, every day.
Okay, well, it's a special thanks to our guest today, Chris White, for coming into the You in Your Business studio. Thanks also to Stephen on sound. The podcast of today's show will be available on dublincityfm.ie from tomorrow. Thank you for your company. And please remember to join me, Alec Drew, again next week at the same time, 1 o'clock, right here on 103.2 Dublin City FM for another edition of You in Your Business.